The Spanish flu killed millions of young people around the world. And President Eisenhower, who had been through the Spanish flu and knew enough in the 1950s not to close down the economy in order to fight a new form of flu. Well, here we have a much milder disease, much milder than the Spanish, incomparably less serious than the Spanish flu or the Asian flu of 57, 58. And we locked down the whole economy. We destroyed millions of small businesses. We made people wear masks, mandated masks on airplanes, as if masks can fight off it's just complete superstition. I mean, there is virtually zero evidence that the propagation of a flu like this that depends on the robustness of people's immune systems can be inhibited by making people wear masks. And this was evident to me from the beginning. So I began, and I discovered that I had friends, I met all sorts of new friends, but my chief writer on my newsletter business, who writes that newsletter, John Schroeder, has written 2 books about attacking COVID policy. William Briggs, who is a brilliant statistician from Cornell, has written a book with the Discovery Institute, and I co-founded Discovery. And then I discovered in Great Barrington, Jeffrey Tucker was holding out. I knew Jeff sort of, but I hardly knew him. And the next thing I heard, the Great Barrington Declaration. So I went over, I'm part of AIRs, which was the source of the sort of loosely held host of the Great Barrington Declaration. And I started discussing it with Jeffrey, and I wrote a foreword for his book, and we were on our way to the Brownstone Institute, which has assembled just people from all around the country. Everybody at the conference dinner had a fascinating story about various grassroots resistance to requiring little kids to wear masks and get vaccinated for something that doesn't affect kids. It's just a bizarre episode of the madness of crowds. And it's sad to see it's virtually global. I mean, only a few countries like Sweden have really resisted. And it's great to be in Florida, where Governor DeSantis and Ladapo is the head chief doctor, his chief medical advisor, who's speaking to the Brownstone Institute and is held out against the mandates of vaccinations and masks for what's actually just another flu. It's just not comparable to the Spanish flu or the Asian flu of the 50s. We have fewer pandemics. The more we globalize, the more we urbanize, the more we interact with each other, the more our immune systems learn to deal with the threats and slings and arrows of a modern world. Sunetra Gupta, the Oxford epidemiologist, says we are all returning to our caves. We imagine that if we stop producing energy, we'll have to return to our caves, because we certainly can't fuel a modern society with sunbeams and breezes, I'll tell you that. I mean, it's the stupidest idea in the history of technology almost. There's never been such a completely silly proposal as to go zero CO2 by 2035 or whatever these imbecilic governors are proposing. The mistakes we're making are so egregious that they could bring down the whole society. They could bring down the power grid, which is what sustains our lives. It's a real threat. All our gasoline is 10% ethanol, and this is supposedly designed to save the planet. But just this having 10% ethanol that gunks up our car motors and makes the gasoline less efficient and clean, it takes 80% of all the footprint of all our energy in the world is consumed by producing corn to put in our cars. Oil well, you drill it in a particular place, and when it's full, you're finished, you remove it. Cornfields, which are applied by tractors and nitrogen fertilizers and just a huge supply chain to sustain the production of corn for just putting 10% to gunk up our cars with 10% ethanol. It's the worst thing for the planet we do. And we're doing it in the name of
the environment.
Of the environment. We waste the environment in the name of the environment. It's unbelievable. Not to be too indignant, but it really is unbelievable. I'm 83 years old, and I haven't seen any policy as stupid as ethanol in our cars, windmills spread out all over the place. All energy is free until you convert it into power that can actually move a motor or transmit a frequency or accomplish a purpose. The fact that wind and sun hits everywhere on the earth is irrelevant. All it does is it means you got to move the energy further, which means power lines all across the country, and then you got to back it up because wind and sun are erratic. They aren't really sources of power at all. They have to be backed up. And so it means the grid becomes more complex and more subject to sabotage. And Putin has declared, believe it or not, that he will wipe out our power grid if we involve ourselves more in the Ukraine. And it's actually, we're making it easier and easier to wipe out our power grid. It's a terrifying prospect. And as William Happer of Princeton physicist, great Princeton physicist, and Richard Lindzen of MIT, their chief meteorology expert, both have declared there's a greater threat of having too little CO2 than too much. That if CO2 drops much more, will actually threaten agricultural production and all life forms on the planet, ultimately. Of course, we're not going to do that. But to hear people talk of CO2 as a poison when it's the chief source of all our food and lifestyles and ability to sit here and discuss policy and propagate it across the world through the Epoch Times is completely dependent on CO2 with every step of the way. And the idea of getting rid of CO2 is you can't even laugh at it. It's so stupid.